Today, we will face the Dogman. There have been numerous sightings of this creature across the United States, with many of these encounters being documented by various organizations like the North American Dogman Project, Paranormal Authority, and Listverse. Some of these occurrences are very disturbing, cementing the Dogman's eerie presence in folklore and eyewitness accounts. Tonight, we bring you a harrowing story based on true events, drawing from these real and terrifying sources. Our story follows a man whose encounter with this cryptid not only threatened his life, but ignited an obsession that would push him to the brink of madness. His deadly encounter with the Dogman begins an unnerving journey into a world where reality blurs with the unimaginable, and the hunter becomes the hunted. These accounts remind us that some legends are all too real. This man didn't realize it, but he just stepped into the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. I always considered myself a skeptic, dismissing most supernatural tales as mere folklore or the products of overactive imaginations. My friends and I would often share these stories, laughing them off as nothing more than campfire entertainment. But one encounter changed everything I believed about the world around us. This is the story of my run-in with the Dogman, a creature I once thought was nothing more than a myth. It was a cool evening in late September when my friends and I decided to go camping in the forests of northern Michigan. We had chosen a secluded spot deep within the woods, far away from the usual camping sites. It was the perfect location for an uninterrupted weekend getaway. We were equipped with everything we needed: tents, food, and enough firewood to keep us warm throughout the chilly nights. As the sun began to set, we set up camp and lit a bonfire. The night was filled with laughter, the crackling of the fire, and the occasional howl of distant wildlife. We were miles away from civilization, and the only light came from our fire and the stars above. After hours of storytelling and roasting marshmallows, we decided to call it a night. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of rustling leaves and twigs snapping outside my tent. Initially, I thought it was just a deer or some other animal passing through the area. But as the noises grew closer and more deliberate, a sense of unease crept over me. I reached for my flashlight and cautiously unzipped the tent flap. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and underbrush. I scanned the area, my pulse quickening. Just as I was about to dismiss it as my imagination, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing about 20 feet away was a tall, shadowy figure. At first, I thought it was a person, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was anything but human. The creature was covered in dark, matted fur, and its eyes reflected the light from my flashlight with an eerie glow. It stood upright, like a man, but its head was distinctly canine, with pointed ears and a long snout. I had heard stories of the Michigan Dogman before, but seeing it in person was far more terrifying than any tale. Frozen in fear, I watched as the creature sniffed the air and took a step closer. Its movements were fluid and calculated, like a predator stalking its prey. I knew I had to act fast. I fumbled for my camera, desperate to capture proof of what I was seeing. But as soon as I raised it to take a picture, the Dogman let out a low, guttural growl that seemed to shake the very ground beneath me. Panicking, I dropped the camera and scrambled back into my tent, zipping it up as quickly as I could. I could hear the creature circling the campsite, its heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. My friends, now awake, whispered frantically, asking what was going on. I told them to stay quiet and still, hoping the Dogman would lose interest and leave. Minutes felt like hours as we sat in terrified silence, listening to the creature's movements. Eventually, The sounds grew fainter, and we dared to peek outside. The dogman was gone, but the sense of dread lingered. We decided to pack up and leave immediately, abandoning our plans for the rest of the weekend. As we drove away from the campsite, the encounter replayed in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had come dangerously close to something beyond our understanding. Over the next few days, I researched the dogman and discovered that our encounter was not unique. There were numerous reports of sightings across Michigan and other parts of the United States, each one more chilling than the last. One story I came across involved a man named Robert Fortney, who encountered the dogman near the Haymarsh State Game Area in 1961. According to his account, he saw a 6-foot-tall, upright canine creature in his driveway late at night. Another report detailed the experiences of Lori Endrizi, who saw the Beast of Bray Road while driving near Elkhorn, Wisconsin. These stories, among others, confirmed that the dogman was not just a figment of my imagination. Despite the fear and uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of validation. My encounter with the dogman had shattered my skepticism and opened my eyes to the mysteries that lurk in the shadows. The following months after our encounter were a mix of sleepless nights and constant anxiety. Every creak in the house, every rustle of leaves outside my window would send me into a panic. I had become hyper-aware of my surroundings, always expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness. My friends and I kept in touch, sharing updates on our lives and our attempts to move past that night. But it was clear that none of us were the same. One evening, about 6 months after our encounter, I received a call from my friend, Mike. His voice was shaky, almost whispering as he spoke. He told me that he had seen the dogman again. This time, it was near his home, just outside the city. He had been driving back from work late at night when he saw the creature standing by the side of the road. It watched him as he drove past, its eyes reflecting the headlights of his car. Mike was terrified, and his fear reignited my own. Determined to find some answers, I began reaching out to others who had reported sightings of the dogman. I joined online forums and attended meetings of the North American Dogman Project, a group dedicated to investigating and documenting dogman encounters. Through these connections, I learned about other sightings and encounters, each one more disturbing than the last. One particularly chilling story came from a woman named Jo, who had multiple encounters with the dogman over several years. Her most terrifying experience occurred when the creature tried to break into her home during a stormy night. She and her boyfriend had barricaded themselves in the bathroom, listening in horror as the dogman ripped through the walls of the house. The sheer terror in her voice as she recounted her story left no doubt in my mind that these encounters were real. Another account that stood out was from a group of young adults traveling through Texas. They described seeing a pitch-black Great Dane running at an abnormal speed before it stopped in the middle of the road, stood up on 2 feet, and walked across the road like a human. The sheer strangeness of their experience mirrored my own, reinforcing the reality of what we had seen. These stories, along with my own encounter, painted a picture of a creature that was intelligent, elusive, and incredibly dangerous. It seemed to have a particular interest in certain individuals, following them and reappearing in their lives. The more I learned, the more I realized that our initial encounter was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of sightings and experiences. As time went on, I began to notice changes in myself. I was more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, and more fearful of the dark. The dogman had left a mark on me, one that couldn't be easily erased. My friends experienced similar changes, each of us dealing with the trauma in our own ways. Some sought therapy, others turned to faith, and some, like me, dove deeper into the mystery, searching for answers. One night, almost a year after our encounter, I decided to return to the site where we had seen the dogman. I needed closure, a way to face my fears and move forward. Armed with a camera, a flashlight, and a sense of determination, I made my way back to the forest. As I approached the campsite, memories of that night flooded back, but I pushed through, determined to confront whatever awaited me. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves under my feet and the occasional hoot of an owl. I reached the spot where we had set up camp and stood there, taking in the silence. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I had faced my fear and emerged unscathed. But then, I heard it, a low growl, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. My heart raced as I turned, shining my flashlight into the darkness. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the Dogman. It was exactly as I remembered. Tall, covered in matted fur, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the night. But this time there was something different. It seemed more menacing, more intent on making its presence known. I stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The Dogman took a step forward, its growl growing louder. I fumbled for my camera, desperate to capture proof of what I was seeing. But as I raised it, the creature lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. I felt its claws digging into my shoulder, its hot breath on my face. In that moment, I thought I was going to die. But just as quickly as it had attacked, the Dogman retreated, disappearing into the forest. I lay there, stunned and bleeding, trying to process what had just happened. It had let me go. But why? As I made my way back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that the Dogman had let me live for a reason. The encounter left me with more questions than answers, and a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Back home, I cleaned and dressed my wounds, and the physical pain served as a reminder of how real the experience had been. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The Dogman was more than just a myth or a legend. It was a living, breathing entity with an intelligence and malice that defied explanation. I decided to document everything that had happened to me, from the first sighting to the most recent attack. I wanted to create a record, not just for myself, but for others who might encounter this creature in the future. I reached out to experts in cryptozoology, hoping to gain some insight into the Dogman's behavior and origins. Their theories ranged from the plausible to the outlandish. Some believed the Dogman was a previously unknown species of upright canine, while others suggested it might be a supernatural entity, perhaps even a shapeshifter or a skinwalker. The lack of concrete evidence only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. Despite the mounting evidence, I struggled to find a way to protect myself and others from the Dogman. Conventional weapons seemed ineffective, and the creature's intelligence made it a formidable adversary. I considered moving away, starting fresh in a place far from the woods of Michigan. But I knew deep down that running wouldn't solve the problem. The Dogman had marked me in some way, and it wouldn't be long before it found me again. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a familiar rustling outside my window. I froze, listening intently as the sounds grew closer. I could feel the Dogman's presence, a heavy, oppressive force that seemed to fill the room. I knew it was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. In a desperate attempt to defend myself, I grabbed a baseball bat and crept towards the window. The creature's glowing eyes met mine through the glass, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. I felt a surge of anger and defiance, determined not to be a victim any longer. I swung the bat with all my might, shattering the window and sending shards of glass flying. The Dogman let out a howl of rage and pain, retreating into the darkness. I stood there, breathless and trembling, realizing that I had finally fought back. The victory was small, but it gave me a glimmer of hope. I knew that the battle was far from over, but I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my life. I contacted a group of paranormal investigators, hoping to enlist their help in confronting the Dogman. They agreed to come to my home, equipped with cameras, audio recorders, and other tools to capture evidence of the creature. The night of the investigation was tense and filled with anticipation. We set up cameras around the perimeter of the house and waited in silence, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Dogman. Hours passed with no sign of the creature, and I began to wonder if it had decided to leave me alone. But just as we were about to call it a night, we heard a series of low growls coming from the woods. The investigators sprang into action, directing their cameras towards the sound. I watched the monitors, my heart pounding as the growls grew louder and more aggressive. Suddenly, one of the cameras picked up movement, and there it was, the Dogman, lurking at the edge of the clearing. It was more menacing than ever, its eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence. The creature circled the house, occasionally glancing towards the cameras, as if it knew exactly what we were doing. The investigators whispered excitedly, capturing footage that would serve as undeniable proof of the Dogman's existence. But as the night wore on, the creature's behavior became more erratic. It began to pace back and forth, growling and snarling, its eyes fixed on me through the monitors. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that the Dogman wasn't just an animal. It was something far more sinister. It seemed to understand our intentions, and it wasn't pleased. The air grew thick with tension, and I knew we had pushed our luck too far. The lead investigator, sensing the danger, suggested we pack up and leave immediately. As we hurriedly gathered our equipment, the Dogman let out a deafening howl, charging towards the house with a speed and ferocity that took us all by surprise. We barely had time to react as it crashed through the front door, its massive form filling the room. The investigators scattered, some of them screaming in terror as they fled into the night. I stood my ground, clutching the baseball bat, determined not to let the creature win. Dogman lunged at me, its claws raking across my arm. I swung the bat with all my strength, striking the creature's head. It yelped in pain, but quickly recovered, its eyes burning with rage. I braced myself for another attack, but the creature suddenly stopped, its ears perking up as if it had heard something. In the distance, I could hear the sound of sirens approaching. The Dogman hesitated, its gaze shifting between me and the door. With a final menacing growl, it turned and bolted out of the house, disappearing into the darkness just as the police arrived. The investigators and I were left shaken and bruised, but alive. But the surprise came when I reviewed the footage with the investigators, piecing together the events of that night. Despite of everything that happened, the cameras did not capture any clear images and audio of the Dogman. The footage was impressive, but you barely could see the creature or anything else besides the screaming and the confusion. Having miserably failed to prove its existence, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Dogman would return. It was out there, somewhere, watching and waiting. The battle was far from over, and I knew that I had to stay vigilant. I fortified my home, installing security systems and motion-activated lights, and I kept a weapon within reach at all times. This damn creature had left its mark on me, both physically and mentally. I carried the scars of our encounters, a constant reminder of the creature's power and malice. But I also carried a sense of purpose, a determination to protect myself and others from the unknown dangers that lurked in the shadows. As I write this, I can still feel its presence, a lurking shadow in the corner of my mind. The encounter was more than just a brush with the supernatural. It was a reminder of the fragile line between reality and the unknown. Even not being able to prove it, I can say, the Dogman is real, and it's out there, watching and waiting. And so am I, ready to confront whatever comes next. Thanks for joining me for another night of terror. My special thanks to my dear friends Debbie and Nick Boy, supporters of my work since the start of this channel. This video is another idea that came from them. Thanks, my friends. Drop a comment with your thoughts, And if you think your story can top this one, send it my way. And remember, the dark has eyes. This is Mr. Scary Guy saying, until next time, good night.